Live, trance, and prosper. Hi, I'm Professor Brian David Phillips, and today I want to talk about consent. When I teach erotic hypnosis, I'm often telling my students, you have to have consent. And I'm hitting that over and over and over. Informed consent, informed consent. You must have informed consent. Now, what is consent? Consent is the free, let me just read this definition. The free and voluntary agreement, approval, or permission for compliance to perform some act. Consent is valid only if it's given after knowing the nature and consequences of the consent, and those of the act for which the consent is given. That's important. The person who gives consent must have the ability to do so without pressure, manipulation, or threat. The person giving the consent, your trance partner, if you're working with erotic hypnosis, they must have all their faculties intact, and they must be of legal age wherever you're at in order to give consent. These are important things. There are actual humans out there in the wild who don't pay attention to safe, sane, consensual. Now, I've got nothing against kink. I think kink is awesome. But if your kink is hypnotic, you still must be safe, sane, and consensual. Now, obviously, must have, in some ways that can lead to some unclear water for certain types of things. But it's not unclear if you are an adult and you're working with other people. This is true in consenting adult relationships. This is true in therapeutic relationships. Therapeutic relationships go even further. Okay, now, conscious, mentally sound adults, yay, who are above the legal age of consent. Simple. This is not rocket science. It's not difficult. It's very easy to do. You just do this thing called talk to your trance partner. Yay! Okay. Now, if the processes you're working with, either in informal, recreational erotic hypnosis or in therapeutic, if they relate to someone who's in a marital relationship or a long-term relationship, it's really important to note that and to bring the spouse into the discussion. Certain types of relationships, you really need to be careful about that. And therapeutic work, you absolutely need to be careful because you have privacy concerns, but you also have relationship concerns. And of course, as a therapist, you would want to be above board no matter what you're doing. And if you're not doing therapy, if you're doing recreational, remember, and hurt none. Do what you want to do with people who want to do it with you, but always consider there may be other people involved in the relationship, even if they're not the ones directly involved in the actions. So you really need to, what did Crowley say? And hurt none, do what thou wilt is the whole of the law. So do what you want, just make sure you're not hurting anybody. And that includes not just your trance partners, but also the trance partners' relationships. Yeah, a lot of baggage when you're doing stuff, isn't there? Well, deal with it. Now, if someone's under the age of 16, then they're out. Done. You're done. You're finished. No more. You don't go any further. Well, actually, for me, it's anyone under the age of majority. So if you're doing erotic work, you really need to not be messing around with kids, period, or people under the age of majority. A 17-year-old might seem mature. Nope. 18-year-old, if you're in a country or a state where 21 is the legal age, then 18-year-olds are out too. Yay. But you do need to, well, don't be an idiot. To have some common sense. Okay? Alrighty. Now, consent isn't valid if the person is mentally unsound, they're not able to make clear decisions. That could be mentally unsound. It could also be drunk or high or confused. So when we're dealing with the mind, we have to be very careful about that. Minors or those who are under the age of consent are out. Their consent doesn't count. All right, you would have to get parental permission, and for the kind of, if it's recreational and you're getting parental permission for erotic hypnosis, there's something wrong in the relationships between the child and the parent and you and reality. So please don't mess around with that. Consent isn't real if it's obtained through force, fraud, or fear. If someone's afraid or if they feel pressured, then that's not consent. So be aware of that. If you're planning on asking someone to be doing some illegal or unethical things in your work, then consent doesn't count. Yep, there you go. So be aware of that. Now, there are different types of consent. There's implied consent and expressed consent. Implied consent, expressed, and informed expressed consent. Implied consent, they seem to be giving you consent in the context. Expressed is the most easy. That's either oral or written. They've said it, I consent to this thing, or they've written it, contract kind of things. But keep in mind, all the other things I said previously about it's not valid if it's these things, they still apply even if they wrote it down. So be aware of that. Informed expressed consent is essentially they've been given all their information and they echo it back to you. They echo it back in oral or written form. Now, when we look at implied versus expressed, expressed could be written or oral. Implied consent is, it's implied either by words or behavior of the person or the circumstances and context of the situation. All right? And so that can get tricky. In therapeutic, they're there for therapy. And you've already discussed things and you're pushing through to the appropriate things. In relationships, it can get tricky. I like to think that if at any point someone seems to be uncomfortable, you terminate, you stop. You stop doing whatever it is you're doing. Emerge them and get back to a comfortable setting. If you want to avoid misunderstandings, it's prudent, it's advisable to go ahead and state your intentions clearly and receive explicit consent rather than just implied, particularly when you're dealing with sensual or sexual things. Don't push through. You really do want to make sure that you're keeping the person comfortable. Comfort is important, whether it is recreational for relationships or intimacy enhancement or for therapeutic means. In some cases, the extent of the consent being implied might later become a matter of disagreement. That is, they seem to be okay with it, and later they have buyer's remorse and they say, I didn't do that. I did not consent to that. Or you think they're okay with it because you're giving them pleasure and they're doing all sorts of awesome things and they feel very uncomfortable. And so it's important that you set up a communication line so they can tell you if they're uncomfortable. They feel comfortable with you so that they can feel comfortable expressing their discomfort. And make sure you pay attention to that. When you're dealing with EroticaTrance, there's a lot of folks who just push through. You know, I have this fantasy. I really want my wife to have sex with multiple men, and I'm going to just go ahead and have her imagine doing that. But that's not her fantasy. She's not comfortable with that. And if you push it through, you're going to be damaging the relationship. Damaging the relationship. Damaging the relationship. And that can be permanent or not permanent, but takes a lot of work to get back to where things were before. And if you're pushing some things, things don't go back. So you really need to be careful about this stuff. Explicit. If they state what their fantasies are, great. Go with those fantasies. Don't slip in yours, especially if you know they're not comfortable with it. All right? There are hundreds of guys who slip in, and usually it's guys, but not always. Some women do this too. Where they slip in some bisexual fantasy stuff with their partner without expressing that with the partner prior to the trance work. And there's a word for that. It's called a dick move. You're being a dick. Don't be a dick. Unless your name is Dick, and at which point be Dick, but don't be a dick. Dick. Okay? Okay. All right. Now, express consent is when you just come right out and say it. And that's a really nice way to approach this kind of work, particularly therapeutic work. If you can express everything that's going to happen and they agree to it. Now, obviously, in therapeutic context, in recreational or in intimacy enhancement context, you may have a general plan, but you don't know how the session's going to go. And so some things may come up, and that's okay. You have expressed consent for the general goalposts. And then you have implied consent for how you get there. But you really do need to read the room, folks. Be careful of how you're handling it, and it may or may not work out okay. Hopefully it'll work out. But you have to pay attention. Right? Now, informed consent is usually that which in the trance partner they're told what's going to happen and they understand and they read back to you that I want this thing. Okay, informed. This, in practical terms, this respects your trance partner's autonomy. As I know 19th century theorists talked about hypnosis of the hypnotist had the will that subjugates the trance partner. We know that's not how it works. In fact, people with higher willpower tend to enter into trance better because they're able to follow the directions. The hypnotist is not forcing their will upon you. It doesn't work that way. The hypnotist is merely guiding you. We are a focused trance guide. And if we respect people, they're more likely to trust us and follow our instructions. Good pre-talk, of course, is very important for that. In therapeutic aspects, when a client consults a therapist for a suspected medical issue, and in EroticaTrance, you sometimes deal with things that have medical ramifications. And if you suspect this is a medical issue, it's a very good idea to have them go to a medical professional. I will ask people, go see a doctor, and I'll work with you as long as you're under the care of a competent medical professional, and at which point your therapeutic work becomes supplemental to that work. If I'm not going to work with folks and tell them, do this instead of a doctor. Doctors don't know what they're doing. I highly respect medical training, and I've had good experience with doctors. And I suggest that if you think someone's got physical issues, they need to see a doctor. So they need to either get screening so you can rule something out, at which point you're free to go with everything, or you can help them with things as they go through medical procedures. So your therapeutic work becomes a supplement for medical care, not a replacement for it. And that is also part of informed consent. They need to be informed of all the ramifications and all the aspects that could be going on. In terms of relationships, intimacy enhancement, and therapy, informed consent constitutes a central feature of an encounter that's characterized by mutual respect and mutual participation, good communication, shared decision making. That's important. That's where informed consent helps you in that toward. It requires dialogue with the person you're working with. You really do have to sit down or stand up or lie down. I don't know. You have to have a dialogue. You have to talk to them about what's going to do. It establishes a reciprocal relationship in the trance guide, trance partner relationship by informed consent, giving them the information and they make an informed decision. You're helping them help you help them. And that's true in relationships and intimacy and enhancement, as well as in simple therapeutic work. Okay? After the initial consent occurs, after you've got that first consent, it doesn't stop there. You may have implied consent for little tweaks here and there, but it's a good idea to keep that dialogue open so that you can continue getting that consent and relationship. Once you've established informed consent, it benefits the trance worker as well as the trance partner. It helps both of you form what we would call a trance alliance, and that's therapeutic or for intimacy, enhancement, or relationships, depending upon the context you're in. So I strongly encourage you to do this. If you don't have consent, you're pushing against the wind. You're not going to take off very far. You might be able to push through for some limited things, but there's going to be so much resistance that you're going to crash and burn. So what you want to do is you want to go with the wind, inform them, get their consent, and that helps you guide them, and you glide through to a successful relationship. Now, there's also something called tertiary informed consent. And for this is really important. If you're doing erotic hypnosis for recreational means, not just for intimacy enhancement for yourself and your significant partner, but just fun. I mean, it is fun. You can do this with folks you don't know well. You can do this with strangers or on a first date. You can. That's fine. However, you got to get their consent. But the thing is this, if someone's in a relationship and you're doing erotic things, you have to be careful. Now, if you're guiding someone into an erotic, sensual experience, and part of that experience is an actual physical experience with you and that person. And yeah, erotic hypnosis works great while you're having actual physical sex. You can do some really cool stuff. Don't know what those cool stuff is? Well, take my classes. But if you're going to be building intimacy with another person, it's a good idea to have the person's partner's permission. Okay? You don't push things through inappropriately. I'm just saying don't cheat. Don't be a dick. Seriously, don't be a dick. I don't know you. You're probably a wonderful person. You are. That guy, I'm not sure. But you are. You're a great person, and so you're not going to be a dick. Male or female. Females can be dicks too. Guys can be dicks. Anybody can be a dick. And don't be one. But it is important to be aware of what's going on and how things are being set up. All right? And that's consent. I just wanted to do a quickie video that turned out to not be so quick, did it? And just talk a little bit about that, because I've seen some posts on some of the groups I'm in recently from folks who really don't have a very strong handle on the idea of informed consent, and they're not really being that safe, sane, or consensual. I hope this has been helpful. If it hasn't, okay. Then thank you for watching this far anyway. Check out my webpage. I hope I'll see some of you in May. On May 1st, we're having a seminar on Beltane, yes, in esoteric hypnosis, which does have some things related to this. And mostly, though, it's esoteric. It's the weird stuff. WYRD. I hope I get to see some of you then. If not, maybe I'll see you another time. For now, though, this is Professor Brian David Phillips saying, live trance and prosper. Bye-bye.